Well, in our lead, so much for it being a European crisis for Europeans to work out, with the announcement early Monday of a close to $1 trillion bailout fund. The European Union, the European Central Bank, and the IMF are all on the hook now together to halt the euro crisis. You're going to hear plenty of snooty talk about the so-called Greek contagion and risky, lavish Greek lifestyles taking us all down. But what really seems to be going on is the reality came home. We're interconnected. And connected by what? Well, among other things, banks that lent and then said, "Oh, what big debts you have. We can't have that." And now here's shock and awe part 2, the financial version. Will it work? And will it work to do what? Well, joining us is GRITTv's economics correspondent and the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, Dean Baker. Dean, let's talk about that top big story of the day, the European bailout fund. What happened to it being a European problem for Europeans to sort out?
Well, it's still largely a problem for Europeans to sort out, although you will notice that the United States did commit several $100 billion in swaps. So, in effect, if they need to call on the Federal Reserve Board for dollars, they will be able to do that. But basically, Europe has indicated that they are going to stand behind Greece and insure its debt. It's a mixed bag. I mean, they're recognizing the size of the problem, but it's not clear this is the route to a solution. And one of the clear things it does is it allows the banks, in effect, to get off the hook. They're the ones that Greece owes lots of money to. The governments are now guaranteeing that debt. Otherwise, they might have taken large write-downs on it.
Is there a parallel to how the Greek government got into so much trouble and how so many borrowers here got into the debts we've seen?
Well, I'd be hesitant to make too many comparisons. I mean, basically, the reason we got in trouble here was we had a big housing bubble. Greece actually was not really a story of a housing bubble. Greece was a story, you had lots of different things going on there, but they've to some extent only marginally functional government in the sense that they have an underground economy that's estimated by the OECD at around 30% of GDP. So what this means is that you have all this money changing hands. It's outside the purview of the government. They're not collecting taxes. Disproportionately, it's wealthy people. So you have a lot of wealthy people in Greece that are paying little or no taxes. That makes it very hard to run a government. That's not really the same story we could tell here with people in the housing bubble.
One of the things I noticed, I was just in Europe for a family business, and I saw that the fascination with deficits has taken over every single part of the political discourse. The British election, as you know, has not resulted in a clear result, but there isn't really one party or party program in the mix that says anything other than we actually better roll back spending and start grappling with that deficit. Stimulus spending seems to be out.
It's very disconcerting because, you know, we do know better. I mean, economists know better, people in government know better, but it's easy to say, you know, let's cut deficits. The big reason we have such large deficits right now is because we had housing bubbles that collapsed and crashed the economy. It's not that we just went on a spending spree. That's utter nonsense. Everyone knows that's nonsense. The people who know the data know that's nonsense. But there's a story they like to tell. They're using this as an opportunity to cut back programs like Social Security, Medicare here, and other programs along the same lines in Europe. So it's really a very pernicious situation. The people who got us here, instead of, you know, taking the blame for it, they're richer and more powerful than ever, and they're using this as an opportunity to turn around and cut back the benefits that people need, ordinary working people need.
What do you make of what happened on the U.S. markets last week? A lot of turmoil, a lot of people saying, well, it was just a trigger trading problem. Others saying, no, they're worried a slide is in the works.
Well, we did have we had a fall in the market because I think people were concerned about the spillover from the Greek and, more importantly, the European crisis, because it's obviously not just Greece. You have Spain, Portugal, Ireland also in trouble. But they're worried about spillover from that. The particular issues around that temporary glitch, I can only speculate, but clearly you had a lot of program trading that kicked in. It was interesting to see, not much consequence for the economy. You had a lot of people, no doubt, made and lost a lot of money by being on the right end or wrong end of those trades. But I'm not too worried. I mean, people focus on the market. Frankly, that's really not the area we should be concerned about. We should be looking at jobs, look at the economy. The market's really is a sideshow.
Well, let's talk about jobs. There was another jobs report out last week. Unemployment slightly up to 9.7%. 290,000 jobs supposedly created. Are we looking at glass half full, empty, what?
Well, glass, I'd say probably about 1/3 full. We are creating jobs. That's good news because we've been losing them, and it's better to create jobs than lose them. But the key issue is the rate of job creation, and this is really not something to celebrate given the severity of the downturn. So right off the bat, we should pull out there were 66,000 temporary jobs created for the census. Nothing wrong with those jobs, but those are going to disappear in a few months. So we shouldn't delude ourselves. So if we say how many jobs were created that we expect to endure, it's about 225,000. That is extremely weak. If you look at the severity of the downturn, compare this to what happened after the last serious downturns, 81, 82, or for that matter, 74, 75, we should be creating almost 500,000 jobs a month. And at this rate of job creation, it'll take us close to 7 years to make up the jobs we lost in a downturn. So again, it's the right direction, but we have a long, long way to go.
While we're talking about direction, I've got to get you to weigh in on this Fannie Mae report. They're talking about more foreclosures, a continuing failure to shift anything really in the housing market, and they're talking about long-term financial sustainability is in doubt.
Yeah, well, Fannie took another big hit. Both Fannie and Freddie lost somewhere in the order of $9 billion again this quarter, and some of this is losses on bad loans that they made in 06, 07. But what's striking is a lot of these losses were on loans that were made in 08, and you sort of wonder, like, what were they doing, and are we going to see big losses on the loans they're making today? Important point to keep in mind here is when Fannie loses money, almost by definition, what that means is they paid banks too much for mortgages. Well, paying banks too much for mortgages was exactly what the original TARP was supposed to be. If we're doing that, we're subsidizing the banks, and I wasn't very fond of the original TARP proposal, and I'm less fond of doing it through Fannie and Freddie when there's no accountability. So we should have a clearer sense of what these government agencies are doing, and they don't seem to be doing it very well.
One thing we do know about what people are doing, and that's banking. That whole sector is spending a lot of money on lobbying around financial reform. The bill is still being debated in the Senate, and one of the things that lobbyists for the banks are very concerned about are new regulations around derivatives. They've spent something like $6.1 million lobbying so far this quarter. What's at stake, of course, is much more than that money in terms of profits made off those derivative trades. Is there any fear on their part or hope on ours that change could really be in the works around derivative trading?
Well, it's striking. There was a very good proposal that came out of the Agricultural Committee headed by Blanche Lincoln, not ordinarily a big populist, that called for the banks to spin off derivative trading from their main operations. They could still have derivative trading in the bank holding company, but it would not be by the bank itself, which means it separates that from the government guaranteed entity. That, to my mind, was a very good measure. It scares the banks to death because they make the big five banks control 90% of this trade. They make about $22 billion a year in revenue on these trades, and they don't want to lose that. So they're prepared to fight. Whether they could be beaten, who knows? I mean, it's impressive it got as far as it did. On the other hand, the Brown-Kaufman amendment that came up last week that would have broken up the big banks, I thought that had a chance. We only got 31 votes for it. So, you know, it's just hard to know where this sits.
Way to go. All right, Dean Baker, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back in touch with you very soon. Dean Baker, our GRITtv economics correspondent.